What's up, Final Fantasy fam? I hope you guys enjoyed the live letter as much as I did, and since my main is a tank, let's talk about all of the tank changes in Endwalker. But first, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me to get notified on all my future videos, because I know you guys like this content and I love making it. So support the channel, and without further ado, let's talk about the general tank changes overall. We've really only seen 4 changes as far as tanking just as a whole, but really only 2 of them impacted us. So the first thing is that using our defensives properly within like a certain window are going to grant greater benefits. Now, without really doing some testing or seeing more footage of this, it's hard to say whether that means the benefit's going to be stronger, or it grants an additional effect, or shares onto party members. We don't really know how that's going to work specifically. Depending on cooldowns too, that could change possibly. But we do know that it's not going to be a specific timing that you need to do. There's just way too much server latency for them to be like, all right, the boss is swinging now, and cooldown, block it. All right, you gained a benefit. It was perfect. There's no real way for them to implement that within the game, I don't think. So it's more or less going to be something like, all right, the boss is casting something, use it within this 3-second window, and then we will count that as using it as an optimal time, giving you an additional benefit. So I'm pretty sure they're going to make it a lot more user-friendly to that standard, rather than making it, or trying to make it, sort of server latency-based perfect timing. Another thing we've had change was our mobility. You know, we've had our gap closing things changed from 15 yalms to 20 yalms. I think this is just more of a quality of life thing. It can be used, you know, as a gap closer greeting, trying to get in there and do more damage if the boss is farther away. But I tend to think it's more for trying to position the boss, and if the boss happens to be across the room, you have to run way over here to just be able to use that gap close, get back in, reposition boss, and make life a little bit easier for everyone overall. The last 2 changes were things that we just saw in Melee as a whole in the game, and that was that ranged attacks will no longer break our 3-part combos, which is really nice because if the boss happens to go far away, cast an AoE, there's a little bit of downtime there where you just have to make that decision. Do I throw, break my combo? Is it even worth it? You know, do I try to get in there and greed, or do I risk not getting the damage down, you know? So being able to throw while not a huge amount of damage is still a little bit of a benefit, just giving you something more to do. And the last thing was that potency levels in the game will be changed. So as you guys see all that beta testing later, or just possibly some of the influencers who get copies of Endwalker to report back what they've seen, if you see potency levels lower on melee, tanks, physical ranged, all that is that the physical numbers on the back end log of the game have been brought up a bit. So the numbers you can't see have been brought up, meaning the potency levels that you do see on your screen are being brought down. Now, overall, these should balance out to roughly what you're doing now. Obviously, there will be some rescaling with our health and damage and everything to be brought down to just sort of squish numbers. But overall, it's not a nerf. We should be fine and pretty much doing kind of what we are consistency-wise now. Starting off with specific jobs, let's talk about the Paladin, the sword and board true hero. And they've really only seen 2 major changes to be noted. The first one was that with Confettior, yeah, they will now be receiving a 3-part combo with that. So I believe this was noted as the swords falling AoE animations within the live letter footage that we saw. So visually very appealing. It might be a lot of stuff to see on your screen at one time, especially in dungeons, but nonetheless, you are getting a new combo to learn as far as AoE rotations, dungeon play, grouping things up, so that'll be nice. And your Wreck with Scat will be equal damage regardless of your MP, to where before it did less damage based on how much MP you had remaining. So I'm not 100% sure if they are balancing it at the top end numbers, or taking the numbers that it would do somewhere between its low end and top end and averaging them out, and it will just do that consistently, but damage on it will be consistent. Up next, let's talk about the Warrior. And you know, even in recent patches, the Warrior has been seeing some buffs, and it is continuing into Endwalker, meaning that I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of them in gameplay, and it's actually really exciting. So basically, we are going to get damage up effects by doing our AoE combos, which is really nice because it felt really bad in dungeons doing that 3-part single target combo just to get our Storm's Eye buff up. And now we will no longer need to do that. We can just go in and start doing our AoEs, get our 10% damage buff. You know, it's not a huge change, it's very minor, but they definitely really worked on the quality of life when it comes to tanking AoEs moving forward. So that's really nice to see. But the major changes for Warrior have really been involved with their single target. Our Upheaval and Onslaught will no longer drain Beast Gauge. So if you think about the 20 rage on both of those abilities that you used to spend, or possibly that some people had a little bit of a hard time dealing with because they maybe missed using it, and now you have enough rage to where you're almost at a fell cleave, so then you're maybe doing your rotation a little bit wrong by trying to get in more fell cleaves and you just neglect that ability. Or you're maybe out really far, and rather than charging in or saving it to charge in, you may not have enough rage, and there's just a lot of weird situations involved with those abilities and them costing Beast Gauge. And it's really just nice to see that essentially you are going to be weaving in a lot more OGCDs because of this, and it'll feel a little bit more fluid overall as a class. The biggest change, as far as I know, everyone loves Fell Cleave, but it has actually seen a little bit of a change. So that 60-second and 120-second window change from the 90-second mark, Warriors have seen a huge change because of this. Now, Inner Release will now be on the 60-second mark, but we will no longer be able to do the 5 Fell Cleaves we used to. Instead, we will be able to do 3. Now, overall, I think this means that we won't need to worry about using it and a boss not moving away from us during it, so that's good in the fact that it will take a shorter time to do our burst. And as far as damage calculations, I mean, if you think about breaking that down into a 30-second mark, you got 5 Fell Cleaves on a 90-second, so that's a 1.6 Fell Cleaves, essentially, every 30 seconds, to where now, if you were to take the 3 Fell Cleaves you can do, divided by a minute, so you're looking at 1.5. So a 0.1 Fell Cleave difference is not going to make or break you in this regard. So overall, it just means you're going to do it more often, still pump out really good numbers, and in addition to that, we will gain a new ability upon using Inner Release. So I mean, that right there is more than going to make up for that damage loss that you thought you might lose from not being able to do 5 Fell Cleaves. So overall, the Warrior class really seems like it's going to be possibly new top dog moving on into Endwalker, and I'm really curious to see what it looks like gameplay wise, how it feels, and the damage numbers that it continues to put out. Third on the list, we have the Edgelord. Yes, that is the Dark Knight, and they really haven't seen a ton of significant changes. Similar to the way that the Warriors cooldowns work, Delirium will now be a 3-use ability, brought down to the 1-minute mark. No real surprise there. Simulacrum will start to clone all of the new abilities you're going to gain through Endwalker. So, again, really nothing significant in that regard. It just means that it'll have a more skill set, more things to do, which is to be expected. You wouldn't want your pet to be using old skills while you gain all these really cool new ones. The only real thing that should be noted with Dark Knight is Salted Earth is no longer going to be a placeable on the ground. Instead, it will now be cast around you. So pretty much just get in the thick of all the mobs, cast Salted Earth, and upon using that, it will have now a follow-up ability. So again, similar to the trend we saw with a lot of other tanks, making AoE a little bit more user-friendly, a lot better for tanks, and that's actually almost it for the Dark Knight. I'm sure we will see a few things moving forward as we get more information released and see more testing. And finally, we have, of course, my main tank, the Gunbreaker. And we haven't really seen a lot of changes to our class, just a lot of quality of life things as a whole. Our AoE was not altered like the other tanks was. Gunbreaker always had really amazing AoE, and it felt really good. It did consistent damage rather than burst damage like a lot of other tanks. The major thing that we saw was saving us a lot of hotbar space moving forward into Endwalker, having more room to put those new abilities on by taking our Gnashing Fang ability and evolving it as our rotation continues into the Savage Claw Wicked Talon instead of needing 3 buttons, and then you had the OGCD button. So instead of hitting like, you know, 1 OGCD, 2 OGCD, 3 OGCD, it's just now one, you know, just 2 buttons over and over. Really good quality of life, again, saving us a lot of that space. We will have our cartridges increased to 3 overall with a trait in Endwalker. So this could mean that our burst windows are going to change a little bit as far as rotations. I'm not 100% sure if they're going to leave Bloodfest at the 90-second mark or possibly change it as well. If they made that lineup a little bit better with No Mercy by bringing it down to the 60-second mark, that would be really good for us. But because it doesn't really work the same way that, you know, other tanks do, where you can only fit so many Fell Cleaves in based on skill speed, and it's based off of, you know, us just pooling up cartridges and loading out a huge burst window with No Mercy. I'm not sure they would do that. You know, moving forward though, I would like us to see possibly a little bit better of a rotation. I know that since Gunbreaker does the most damage, they wanted to keep it a little bit complex for that. But just having to learn, you know, an opener, a No Mercy window with Bloodfest, and then a No Mercy window with no Bloodfest is pretty daunting for new players, I think, especially those who are trying to get into the Gunbreaker class and going from something like a warrior. So overall, I'd like to maybe see more gameplay footage of that, see what its cooldowns look like and how our No Mercy windows get affected. But nonetheless, at least quality of life changes, and having that third cartridge could be really interesting as far as laying out some burst things, whether we use them for our AoE or for single targets. So I'm curious to see how all that impacts it. If there was any info that I did happen to miss in this live letter coverage, then go ahead and leave that in the comments down below. As always, thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.